Well, I've got some good news for you. We are going to award you the Windham-Campbell Prize this year.
I feel very warm inside.
It's totally, you have no idea.
What does that mean?
The prize itself is to recognize your body of work to date, and you also get $175,000 to support your writing.
That's insane.
This is incredible news. Thank you.
It's a really huge moment of validation.
This is like gonna change my life.
I was so not expecting something like this.
Do people cry a lot?
You do.
Oh my God.
I'm super thrilled and grateful and beyond excited.
My name is Christopher Chen.
Sonia Kelly,
Deirdre Madden,
Catherine Scanlon. My name is Jen Hatfield.
M. Nobese Philip.
Hanif Abdurraqib.
my name is Christina Sharp.
and I'm a recipient of
The 2024
Windham-Campbell Prize
for Drama,
for Fiction, for Poetry.
For nonfiction. It's an honor to be among a long lineage of people who have won this prize who are heroes of mine. Winning this prize puts me in conversation with the work of artists I love greatly, and I'm really thankful for that.
Literature has always been one of my primary inspirations to becoming a writer and also for a lot of my plays to this day. So to be honored by a very prestigious literary award was something that made me feel understood in a very, very profound way.
When you have been writing for a very long time, you can start to think, I'm still interested, but I don't know if anybody else is at this stage. And so to have an endorsement like this, it's a true gift.
I think it's time to try and make some more of my own work now. And I actually thought the possibility of doing that was drifting further away, and now it feels like it's coming closer to shore, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you. I have a pretty fun job, huh? Welcome everybody to the Windham-Campbell Prizes. Prizes Festival. My name is Mike Kelleher. I'm the director of the prizes. The festival officially kicked off last night, so if you are out and about on campus, you'll see our big tent up on Cross campus. And after tonight, we have 2 full days of events. There's going to be events in the tent from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. On Thursday and Friday. In the afternoons, there'll be events on the mezzanine inside the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. At night, we'll be back in here tomorrow night and on Friday night. We also have a couple of great events in the galleries upstairs at lunchtime. So please come to as many of these events as you can. We've got a really great lineup, and everybody's really excited to be here. I should also mention at the events out in the tent, there's free food all day. So come on out. One of the things I'm also really excited about this year is that for the first time, we're going to have books on sale at the Prize Festival. Possible Futures Books here in New Haven is our, yeah. They're going to be parking their book bike on the sidewalk near our tent out there on College Street. So please come out. Everybody's books are going to be on sale, and we're really excited to sell them to you. Inside the tent, there's an info booth. There are programs. If you sign up for our newsletter, you get one of our fancy totes, so you can take one of those home with you. We're going to be doing some giveaways throughout the week. Some of you lucky people have already gotten our fabulous Windham-Campbell baseball caps that say fiction, poetry, nonfiction, or drama. You can get one for each category if you're in the right place at the right time. When he passed away in 2010, Donald Windham left a will containing an extraordinary gift to Yale University to establish the Windham-Campbell Prizes in honor of his lifelong partner, Sandy Campbell. The prizes were to be made annually to writers to allow them to maintain themselves comfortably for 1 year to pursue their writing without having to be concerned about outside support. Thanks to his generosity, each year we give out 8 awards, which are currently valued at $175,000 apiece. As of tonight, the prize will have been awarded to 99 writers representing more than 20 nationalities. So as you can imagine, this year-long process and this festival are a huge effort. So I want to just say thank you to a whole bunch of people before we get started. Our various partners on this festival include Atticus Bookstore, the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, Brink, a review of books, Cooperative Arts and Humanities High School, David Geffen School of Drama at Yale, the Department of African American Studies, Department of Comparative Literature, the English Department, the Office of New Haven and State Affairs, the Office of the President, Possible Futures Neighborhood Book Space, Theater Studies, the Yale Bookstore, Whitney Humanities Center, Yale Center for British Art, Yale Creative Writing, Yale Journal of Literary Translation, and the Yale University Art Gallery. Our official media partner is WSHU Public Radio. I'd also like to shout out a lot of our really deep partners like the Yale Review, who have just published a special issue featuring the work of present and past prize recipients. Yale University Press, who will publish a book version of Lydia Davis' talk next year in their Why I Write series. Yeah. The previous two lectures both came out in the last 6 months, so you can get the lectures by Greil Marcus and Natasha Trethewey at your favorite bookstore. I'd also like to give a shout out to all the volunteers on our student planning committee. There's tons of them, and some of them are here tonight, so thank you everybody on that committee, yeah? And the amazing Yale Conferences and Events team, Megan Palizzi, you guys are doing a great job. Thank you for helping me not fall apart. I'd like to also thank the director and staff of the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library and our amazing program manager who's over in the Beinecke right now, Megan Eckerly. Give Megan a huge hand. Lastly, I just want to say that each year the prize recipients are selected after a very long, rigorous process that involves an enormous number of people. We have 60 nominators. We have 12 members of the individual prize juries, and we have 9 members of our prize selection committee, and they all work anonymously. But some of them may be here among you tonight. So please give them a hand. And now I'm really excited to introduce a newbie to our stage here, Yale's new president, to give out the prizes, Maury McInnes.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library for your stewardship of the Windham-Campbell Prizes and Literary Festival. I am delighted to attend this special event for the first time and to welcome all of you to celebrate this wonderful prize with a keynote address by Lydia Davis. Donald Windham and Sandy Campbell were men of shared vision. It was a vision of community where striving to find the right words for the page, or the right gestures or the right intonations for the stage depended not just on individual genius, but on a larger sense that words and actions mattered to your friends, your neighbors, even the strangers who knew you only through your work. It was a vision that understood that creativity was work, and that to work, you needed time to develop and practice your craft. It was a vision that understood that community and work go hand in hand to make art that endures, that moves us, the audience, in ways we feel, but perhaps never fully understand. I think Yale is a place that values community, work, creativity, and art. Our libraries, our Faculty of Arts and Humanities, the many spaces and places and people who devote themselves to making art and music and literature are a part of our everyday lives, and they are an essential part of a Yale education. These elements form the kind of community that Windham and Campbell lived and that they hoped to foster by establishing this prize at Yale. I am incredibly moved by the vision and foresight of these two men in establishing this global award at Yale. I think it is safe to say that their love for each other and for the written word is the great legacy this prize has left to us and to the world. Now, it gives me great pleasure to recognize this year's recipients.
My name is Hanif Abdurakib. I am a writer of poems, of essays, and of cultural criticism. I think my writing is intimate and personal, but it's also attempting to broaden the scope of what intimacy can be. So when I write about the city I love, I'm writing about it in the way that I hope it feels like it could be your city. When I'm writing about love and heartbreak, I'm writing about a specific heartbreak to me, but I am writing also about a heartbreak that might feel touchable to you. There's a desire to bear witness to something improbable and thrilling, and I think I get that from music. I get that from sports. I get that even from being a fan of, say, sneakers. There's an eagerness and excitement that I take to my work that is guided by a desire to do right by the things I love. And I define my fandom by having a passion that requires one to be rigorous about the things they love. Rigorous critique, rigorous in pleasure, and that to me holds me accountable to a kind of fandom that can flourish and grow and grow and grow. So much of my writing is really attempting to be critical about the things I love so that I can contextualize them for myself and therefore love them more robustly, love them with a higher level of ferocity. And of course, I let other people along for the ride in the hopes that it might help contextualize their own fandoms for them. Not fandom for what I love, especially love what I love in the way that I love it. That is near impossible. But what I do care about is if they can find something in how I'm contextualizing my affection and apply it to their own affections after they put the work down. I think about writing as being in the pursuit of beautiful language to extract or shake out a curiosity that's been long haunting me in a pleasureful way. And I'll do as much as it takes and seek out as much language as it takes to get there.
I am Christina Sharp, and I write creative nonfiction. Visual art has become completely central to the way that I think about the world. It's completely expanded my understanding of the wake of slavery and the present that we are living in and trying to make sense of and unmake. And that means things that many people wouldn't connect to slavery, but are very much the afterlives of slavery in terms of different educational opportunities and outcomes, differences in life expectancy, etc. It's important to me to try to speak to as broad an audience as I can and for the work to travel in all kinds of ways. Black people have deep theoretical understandings of the conditions under which we are living, and it was important to me to write books that spoke to those conditions. I didn't imagine myself imparting knowledge, but being part of a conversation of people across the world who are working in those materials and thinking through what that means and how it's manifest. We don't write alone. We don't think alone. You're always engaging the work of others on what feels almost like a molecular level. But there's also the kind of writing with and extending a thought that I think we do all of the time. There's a sentence that I repeat in the wake, that we Black people may have been constituted through and by overwhelming violence and force, but that we are not known only to ourselves and to each other by that force. And I wanted people to take away from my writing a deep understanding of the kinds of histories of violence and the ways that we as Black people make life outside of that and practice other ways of being in relation to each other and to other people in the world.
My name is Christopher Chen, and I'm a playwright. I was born and raised in San Francisco, and I grew up in an interracial family. My father is Chinese, my mom is white, and they were this really liberal, hippie-adjacent couple. As such, my parents were very, very encouraging of my early creative endeavors, which I really indulged in as a little kid. I got into playwriting almost by accident. In college, I took music classes, I took film classes, I took literature classes, poetry, everything except for playwriting. But I also took theater classes just because they were fun. I wrote my first play because I wanted something to direct. I was looking for plays that spoke to me and I just couldn't find one. So I decided to just write one for myself. I found that playwriting was almost the perfect union of all of my different creative impulses. You know, it kind of combined the literary with the musical, with the spectacle of cinema, and it was just a lot of fun to do. And it just became this perfect medium for me. I like to think of my plays as providing 50% of the event, and for the audience to provide the other 50%. I think it's almost my job to coax the audience into, leaning forward and engaging. So they're not quite sure initially what's going on or what they feel about the subject or characters at hand. And in doing so, they're almost forced to wrestle with the play and what their own feelings about the subject matter are in real time, right along with the characters, kind of in the same ways in which I myself have been wrestling with the subject matter in the writing, so that it becomes this much more dynamic space for engagement and ultimately discourse between the play and the audience.
My name is Sonia Kelly, and I'm an Irish playwright living in Dublin. Growing up in Ireland in the 1980s, I think we were a country that was shaking itself out of a theocratic vice grip, and theatre was a world that represented to me a freedom from that control, a freedom to live a different kind of life, and it was something I was completely magnetized towards. There was a big shake-up in Irish theatre. It was a real opportunity for me to go, okay, well, if you want the landscape of theatre to be different, what is your contribution to it? And for me, that was in really slick, contemporary, Irish-written comedy, which didn't necessarily impact the condition of being Irish, but impact the condition of being human. Particularly, I think with my work, a lot of it is focused on how do we succeed when we consider each other, and why is it we fail, and what are the consequences of that failure? I think humor is like a can opener for the brain. People are more open-minded when they laugh. There is an energy of commonality when people are laughing together in a room that live theatre can generate. It's funny, like we all walk around with operas in our head. And sometimes I sit at my desk here and I look out the window and I go, there's someone who's passing by and they're going, I have to do this, I have to get that, well, she hasn't rung me back, and la 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 la. The brain is always active. And what I tried to do is imbue that sense of private motor that runs in everybody's head as they go through the beats of their average day until they collide with something that is the most unaverage thing to happen ever. I often feel that people go to the theatre to look for answers, and I think for me, if I'm not trying to make sense of those things when I'm writing, I'm not writing.
My name is Catherine Scanlon, and I write short fiction and novels. My process is so particular for each book that I'm working on, so it's a sensitivity and response to the materials that I'm working with. Ognine Fog is based on a diary that I found at a public estate auction. I started reading it and found that the way that this woman wrote about her daily life was just so wonderful and unique. I just got really interested in this writing and started typing out the sentences that really jumped out at me. Kick the Latch came about because I met this woman named Sonia. She's an antique dealer now, but spent her life as a horse trainer. I didn't know if anything would come of it at all. I just thought that she would be an interesting person to meet and to talk to. And by the end of that first conversation, I felt like I could write a book about her. She had told me so many interesting stories. And so we ended up having 3 or 4 more long phone conversations that I recorded and transcribed. And then just started working with that text, that transcribed material that I had. I am really interested in real life. I think that there's so much amazing material and there's so many interesting details and stories, and I really love working with this sort of material, crafting it and shaping it and framing it. It's no longer trying to be just this very straightforward portrait of this person in a non-fictional way. It's still a very straightforward portrait, but in a way where it's just much more shaped and sort of decided by me. There's a quote by Kenneth Burke that says, "Any simplification of a human life is a fiction." I really like that idea. The way that I look at this material is always inherently with the mind of a fiction writer.
My name is Deirdre Madden. I'm a novelist and I'm from Ireland. I was born in Belfast and I grew up in the countryside. When I was very young, I thought I'd so love to have my name on a book. Imagine you being responsible for this thing. Imagine if it was yours. So I think that drove me on, and that focus has never really gone away. I think time is one of the great subjects of literature. It dominates our life completely, and how that interacts with one's own lived experience then, and how you recall things that are over, the impossibility of getting time back again. You think about the bad times and there's a relief in knowing that they're over and that they can never possibly come back. But there's also then a great sadness in thinking about the good times and maybe thinking, how do you get back to those? Are they gone? Can you still connect to them? That is a very powerful driver for my imagination. I think characters can be quite hard to get to know. It's almost like you're trying to find who this person is, and then as you work and work, it becomes clearer. You get closer to what it is that you can see in your mind and then get that across in the language, but it can take a very long time. I feel as a writer, it's almost your duty to be interested in almost everything. If I meet someone whose life experience and whose work is something very, very different to mine, that really interests me. I think it's important to keep your mind as open as possible and to be as imaginatively interested in everybody and as many things as possible.
My name is M. Nubese Philip, and I live in the space-time of Toronto. We come from Trinidad and Tobago. I write poetry, fiction, non-fiction, and drama. You know, language has been such a difficult area to inhabit. There is something, perhaps it comes out of that colonial experience where there is this sense of wanting to write myself out of that experience and into something that makes sense. I consider Zong as an ex-aquaing, bringing from the water, of these souls who were thrown overboard. Zong is a slave ship with some 470 enslaved people. The way the text is set up, the fragments of words, the phrases, the text works like the lungs, and we breathe for those who couldn't breathe before. I believe that poetry exists outside of us, and that we poets are entering this experience and bringing something back for others to understand. Having been trained in law, one of the things that I feel like I'm always struggling with, I don't want to make argument in poetry. I really want to live in the contradictions when they appear. I really want to live in the both and, as in English is my mother tongue, is my father tongue, is a foreign language, is a foreign language. But that to me is what poetry offers me, this place of balancing these contradictions sometimes, because that is what I think the human condition is.
My name's Jen Hadfield and I'm a poet. I think one thing that has always driven me to writing is my awkwardness in speaking. I'm always trying to capture the way I say things, which in reality is pretty awkward and stilted and full of silences and breath, and I really want to capture all of that. The silence and the breath for me are what brings poetry to life. Poetry is made of words and silent words. It's those two things together. I get asked why I moved to Shetland quite often, and I give a different answer every time. I wanted to live somewhere where there was a lot of other species on my doorstep and where I could hop out my front door and be on a cliff in 5 minutes. I have a desperate desire to celebrate the natural world and the wild world, and to say something about our here and now. I also fell in love with the Shetland language. It's not my language, I didn't grow up with it, but my God, I love it. It's a wonderful language with some incredible words. It's also an endangered language, and I want to use it and celebrate it and make people aware of it as much as I can. I spend a lot of my time trying to write a poem and not writing a very good poem. I think that the trying is an important part of the practice. The poems that keep me writing are the ones that come to you unbidden, I think. There's just a few poems in every book that I've published that I felt like I got for nothing. They feel like they come through you as if you were just a kind of an instrument, and I love that feeling.
So ladies and gentlemen, the 2024 Windham-Campbell Prize recipient. Could you all please stand? Stand.
One more round of applause for these amazing writers. Yeah. So we're now going to commemorate our celebration with our annual Windham-Campbell Lecture to be delivered by Lydia Davis. The only thing I'll say about this lecture is that we ask each writer one question. It's a really easy one. Why do you write? And we get a different answer every year. So we're really excited and honored to have her here. And she is going to be introduced by our esteemed colleague from the Comparative Literature Department, former poetry editor and distinguished translator, poetry editor of the Paris Review, I should say, excuse me, Robin Cresswell.
What if, as an experiment, you treated each moment of your life, each object that came into the slipstream of your consciousness, each person, each decision, not only the important decisions, but also those that don't seem like decisions at all, just events that happen to you? What if you gave each of these things the time it takes to think them all the way through, took them as opportunities for illumination, even if the usual outcome is a deeper kind of puzzlement? To conduct such an experiment in patient and even obsessive scrutiny, in second and third thoughts, in baffled epiphanies and sudden or sideways illumination, is to enter the world of Lydia Davis's fiction. Readers, or at least reviewers, have worried over what to call the texts Davis writes. Short stories, micro-essays, micro-essays, philosophical investigations. In 2009, she published the collected stories of Lydia Davis, which included her first 4 books, but not her novel of heartbreak and retrospection, The End of the Story, though the novel is also a kind of story. I find myself reading Davis's stories as thought experiments. Each is exquisitely designed and goes places you would never expect. There's often a striking premise or puzzling donnée. The observation, for example, that the writer treats her dictionaries with more care than she treats her son. Or the fact, and apparently it is a fact, that the pianist Glenn Gould was a fan of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. These are narrative seeds that Davis carefully tends to, allowing them to grow and exfoliate, always unpredictably, but under rigorous constraints, like bonsai trees. And I should say I'm a little nervous about that comparison. An interviewer with the Paris Review once asked Davis why she uses so few similes and metaphors in her writing, and Davis responded, "I don't think symbolically at all." This wariness is an ethical as well as writerly practice. Her experiments strive to grant each person or object a husband's sock, a bowl of cornmeal, a trio of cows, its singular due. Symbolic thinking is always untrue, betrays a lack of attention, a failure to actually look and listen. And this ethic leads to wonderful comedy, and Davis is an extraordinarily funny writer. The comedy ranges from the confessional, quote, "In fact, I liked teaching because I like telling other people what to do," to the philosophical, quote, "Now that I have been here for a little while, I can say with confidence that I have never been here before." A commitment to the quiddity of each thing or occasion leads in a story called A Second Chance to an alarming discovery, the impossibility of learning from one's mistakes. Quote, "If only I had a chance to learn from my mistakes, I would," the narrator tells us. The problem is that all of our errors, like unhappy families, are different. Quote, "You do something wrong and see what the right thing would have been and are ready to do it, should you have the chance again. But the next experience is quite different, and your judgment is wrong again. And though you are now prepared for this experience, should it repeat itself, you are not prepared for the next experience." The collection Can't and Won't, a memorably Beckettian title, published in 2014, is full of stories of mistaken identity. In one story, a narrator named Lydia Davis writes a letter of complaint to the president of the American Biographical Institute. The letter of complaint is one of Davis's special genres, for as she told an interviewer, quote, "I realized I had a lot to complain about." In the letter, she wonders how the Institute can have taken any real care in nominating her as Woman of the Year for 2006, an honor she is asked to pay $195 to certify, when the nomination letter misspells her name. In a series of thought experiments called Examples of Confusion, Davis acknowledges how difficult it can be to tell one thing from another. Driving in the rain, I see a crumpled brown thing ahead in the middle of the road. I think it is an animal. I feel sadness for it, and for all the animals I have been seeing in the road and by the edge of the road. When I come closer, I find it is not an animal, but a paper bag. Then there's a moment when my sadness from before is still there, along with the paper bag, so that I appear to feel sadness for the paper bag. Of course, feelings are often attached to the wrong objects. That's kind of what feelings are, and refuse to detach themselves long after they should. And maybe feeling sadness for a paper bag isn't really so silly, since this paper bag in the middle of a wet road no doubt has a story of its own and deserves our attention as well. Alongside or entwined with Davis's work as a writer of fiction is her work as a translator, most notably from the French, more recently from the Dutch. Her versions of Proust, Blanchot, Foucault, and Pierre-Jean Jouve have won more accolades and awards than I can possibly name. In the face of skepticism or gloom about the challenges, even impossibility of translation, she has written in convincing detail of its many pleasures. One pleasure is puzzle solving. Another is deep armchair travel. A third is company. And beyond that, the chance, as she writes, to enter another person, to ventriloquize them, to speak through their lips, or allow them to speak through yours. Davis's translations are remarkable for their intimate adherence to the original syntax, their miming of the sequence of thoughts. This is a way, she has explained, of refusing to, quote, impose my own style on the thing I'm translating. To me, that would be almost morally or ethically wrong. So translation, too, must acknowledge the singularity of other things, the peculiarities that make the other writer them and not you. This is a hard discipline. In another example of confusion, Davis gives us, I think, an especially memorable figure for the relation between writer and translator, an arabesque of ethics and erotics, though of course that might just be me thinking symbolically. There is his right leg over my right leg, my left leg over his right leg, his left arm under my back, my right arm around his head, his right arm across my chest, my left arm across his right arm, and my right hand stroking his right temple. Now it becomes difficult to tell what part of what body is actually mine and what part his. I rub his head as it lies pressed against mine, and I hear the strands of his hair chafing against his skull, as though it is my own hair chafing against my own skull, as though I now hear with his ears and from inside his head. Please join me in welcoming Lydia Davis.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here on this undeniably happy occasion, and I congratulate all the winners of this amazing prize. I hope you have a good year or more, maybe many more, writing on the strength of that. The 19th century poet John Clare said he found his poems in the fields and only wrote them down. It is not exactly what happens with me, and probably not with him. But I like the idea that a piece of writing starts with something outside coming in. When I was invited last fall to give this talk, I did say yes almost right away. But I also thought the subject proposed was very difficult. Why I write. I drew a solid blank, although I do have a lot to say, generally speaking. A person once said to me, "You're a writer. You must have a lot to say." I have thought about his assumption many times. Is it that simple? I do have a lot to say. I have, actually, to be literal about it, an infinite amount to say. But then I imagine everyone has a lot to say, writers and non-writers alike. Can you imagine anyone not having a lot to say, even if they keep their mouth closed? I will summarize very quickly the substance of the debates that I entertained during the next weeks and then months after I was invited to write about this. 1, I don't ever ask myself why I write. I'm a little afraid of that question. It feels safer not to ask it. I'd rather not talk or even think about why I write. I'd rather not know if there's anything to know. 2, if I have to, I'd rather talk about why other writers write. Pure speculation, or fairly pure speculation, since sometimes you at least know why they think they write something. I do so much reading. I am so often in the company of other writers and contending with at least how they write, in some cases speculating as to why certain other writers I admire, have written certain of their more puzzling books. 3, no, maybe I'd rather not talk about why other writers wrote certain of their books, but how other writers write. 4, if I talk about how other writers write, maybe I can talk about how I write. 5, or maybe I can at least talk about how I have written certain of my stories. 6, but does that in any way answer the question of why I write? 7, maybe it does, because how I write a story may show me why I wanted to write a story in the first place. 8. At least I can be pretty sure of what were not the reasons I started writing back in the beginning. I did not start writing in pursuit of fame or money. 9. I can at least look at my earliest writing self, going back to the origins of intending to write, and say that I admired certain pieces of writing and aspired to write something as fine as one of those poems or stories, for instance, or at least have the pleasure of trying. 10. Yes, I know at least that I was surprised and pleased, even at age 13, by the opening pages of Beckett's Malone Dies, in which the only action is that the hero has dropped his pencil. And later by such linguistically intriguing sentences in Beckett, such as the flagstone before her door that by dint her little weight has grooved. And I know that some years later, among many other writers, I discovered the economy and humor and firmly ethical positions of the stories of Grace Paley. And I'm pretty sure I wanted to be able to write to their high standards. 11. I can be pretty sure it is pleasure that keeps me going. There, maybe I've actually arrived at why I write. Or one reason, the pleasure of the original inspiring material, of encountering a form that I would like to write in, of handling the language, of manipulating the punctuation carefully to make it do exactly the right thing to my meaning, of seeing the story evolve, of revising, which means seeing the parts of a story or a sentence become better and better, the pleasure of seeing what the story looks like when it's done, though that pleasure is sometimes greater and sometimes less, but most importantly, the pleasure of seeing a story exist that didn't exist before. 12, I can be sure again of what are not the reasons I write a story. I don't write to convey a message. I don't write it to achieve any particular purpose. I don't write to persuade a reader of an ethical or political position of my own, though those positions certainly determine the bias of a story. I don't write a story for any particular audience. I don't think of a writer as I write, though I'm sure that after I've finished writing it, I would be glad if a reader enjoyed or was moved by it. I don't write a story to move someone. It is not that direct. It is indirect. I encounter something that moves me. I try to let a story evolve, or I guide it, into a form that fits it, that is faithful to the power or beauty of that original material. Then a reader reads the story, and if that reader is of a certain temperament, not too dissimilar to mine, he or she may be moved by the story. Being moved, however, in a sense, only in part by my story, or by my story as intermediary, as conveying what was inherent for me as I saw it, or possible in the original material. If I had had the deliberate intention of moving someone, I would be thinking more of the reader and of my own manipulative skill than of what the material itself might need in order to be fully expressed. My attention would be in the wrong place. When I am asked why I write, and I want to say for the pleasure of making a story that did not exist before, I'm thinking that it is a complicated pleasure. The pleasure is a demanding one. It inheres not just in the material of the story, the development of the story and the result of that development, if the story turns out well, but in the demands of the writing, the demands for just the right syntax, the right balance, the right words, even for just the right spelling of the English words in all their eccentric variety. The first pleasure being the encounter with something that demands to be treated, to be formed into something. When I describe a story as beginning with something outside coming in, it is this encounter. The pleasure of the encountered material is the beginning of a story. I write something because it occurs to me to write it. It occurs to me rather than I going out in search of it. It is in some sense found in a field. It may be an involuntary idea of my own, or it may be material that is actually outside me, a companionable bug, or a stately cow, or the strangeness of the word organized when used for a tropical storm, or an emphatic human being saying something unexpected overheard on a train. This material presents itself and makes me want to see it expressed in a form that is just right. I then go forward writing it blindly, in a sense, or guided by a part of my mind not quite under my control. I do not stop to look forward toward the end of the story, and certainly not toward its meaning. If I imposed a purpose on the story, the life would go out of it. Pleasure is one emotion at the origin of a story, but other emotions come in. The emotion can be strong or mild. It can be horror or anger or amusement. I often relish human behavior, and I am also often horrified by it. I relish the behavior of animals and insects and even minerals and the phenomena of physics. I am bemused and a little in awe when I see how long a shadow is cast by the nearly horizontal afternoon sunlight from a single grain of salt on the kitchen counter. In another story, which takes place on the same counter, I am sympathetic to a little bug that runs away from my sponge and feel affection as I imagine, or don't imagine, but know, that the bug has business elsewhere. He may simply have forgotten it for a moment until my sponge shoved him suddenly, inadvertently, and off he went. The first pleasure came from the sight of the bug, but further pleasure came from choosing to write the word business in relation to the bug. But I have respect for bugs, so I hope the story did not seem condescending. Other things in our world may anger and frustrate me or make me despair. Those emotions rarely come out directly in a story. They simply continue to abide inside me, having matured deep into my bones over time. They may come out indirectly in a story or not at all, but if I read it later, I can see that they lie somewhere beneath or behind the story or in its very fabric. How could they not, since they are part of what I am, and the story is coming from me? I wrote a story called The Cows. I did not write it with any intention. I did not even write it all at once. It took 3 years to accumulate. It was as simple as looking out the window or standing by the road, looking across the road and observing the cows, who over the years started by being 3 heifers, then grew up and bore 2 calves. After some time, the 2 calves, once they were also grown up, were taken away. I wrote down what I saw occasionally. After 3 years, I had 80-some observations. I made a little book of it with accompanying photos. Only later did I realize that the emotions behind this story were not only my various forms of pleasure in the positions and behaviors of the cows and their calves, and the setting down of my observations of them, but also my pain and sorrow over the treatment of most cows in the world. I could see what these cows, my neighbor cows, preferred when given almost complete freedom, which they had, to go in and out of their barn, to drink from a bathtub by the fence, to walk to a particular spot in their large field, in winter to stand still in the snow in the warm sun. Even when they were larger than their mothers, the calves went on nursing. A few tugs at the teat now and then, and their mothers stood still and waited. All I wanted to do in writing the piece called The Cows was portray the individuality of these cows and their choices, to record them as they looked, black on green or white, in the field. Intellectual delight at certain kinds of language is another emotion. I am moved by the manipulation of language, what I can do with it and what other writers do with it. I am reading all the time, and I am reading all the time that I am in the midst of writing something. And I probably constantly learn more nuances of more things about writing, about ways of writing, or have lessons imprinted more deeply in me from what I read, especially since I do a lot of analyzing when I read, especially of what creates the style or tone of a book that pleases me or of a book that I dislike. If a pattern or rhythm pleases me greatly, it is likely to remain imprinted on me somewhere and come out at some point in something I write. I may choose consciously to use a form I have encountered in a piece of writing by someone else, but I may also have imprinted on me a pattern or rhythm from a piece of writing by someone else. Why am I so enraptured by a book I am reading these days, James Baldwin's No Name in the Street? It may be his company, his voice, and the invitation of his narrative style that caused me to pick up the book again and again, even though I was not intending to read another book of his right now, and there are other books I'm supposed to be reading. Is it the plainness of his word choices or their precision, or is it the clarity and balance of his sentences or the way he uses repetition to take us from one phrase to the next, or his restrained or unrestrained passion? At one point in the book, though in general he uses metaphor sparingly, he was evidently angry enough during the incident or afterwards in the writing to go to a metaphorical extreme. Here he is portraying a woman whose hostility he has had to confront in a restaurant where he is not welcome. He describes her as having, quote, a face like a rusty hatchet and eyes like two rusty nails, nails left over from the crucifixion. I am arrested by the image. I stop reading forward and read again what I've just read and start figuring out how Baldwin manipulated the syntax and word choices to make this image even more powerful. And I don't say every choice is conscious. These choices, I'm interested in what their effect is. Why does he repeat nails, like two rusty nails, nails left over? Why does he not say the second part all at once, eyes like two rusty nails left over from the crucifixion? I think he repeats nails because of the pace he wants for the sentence, so that first we have a chance to absorb on its own the arresting image of the two rusty nails before he makes the image even more devastating. Another reason to repeat it may be to convey the sense that he himself stopped at rusty nails and then had a further thought about the crucifixion. And why does he say left over from the crucifixion rather than just two rusty nails from the crucifixion? There are probably several answers. The words left over may make the crucifixion and the hammering together of the cross all the more physically real for us. But also the words left over may suggest a thing for which another use could be found, that after the nails were used to crucify Jesus of Nazareth, they could be employed over and over again for other handy, vicious purposes, perhaps every time such hatred as this woman felt was expressed. The word bother came into my life in a specific positive sense quite recently when I read an interview given by John Ashbery some years ago in which he talked about how he encountered the source of his long poem, Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror, and especially the title. He says that he first encountered the painting by the young Francesco Parmigianino in the form of a reproduction in a magazine, and the title bothered him. He then, years later, encountered the actual painting in a museum in Vienna, and it bothered him again. It bothered him until he, quote, did something about it. And he uses the word bother in this way in this interview about at least one other thing that inspired a poem. I encountered the Ashbery interview in the midst of the time when I was beginning to struggle to answer the question of why I write, and I saw that this could be a very concise, truthful answer to the question. The reason why I write a particular story may be because something, which I call material, as in raw material, bothers me until I do something about it. In these cases, the word bother is wholly positive. The cows bothered me. The shadow of the grain of salt bothered me. Back in the winter when I was thinking about both why and how other writers write and was tempted to write only about other writers, I was reading a book by George Sturt from early in the 20th century called The Wheelwright's Shop. As I was reading the book, which took me some months, and after I was done reading it, it remained in my mind to bother me. It posed the question of why exactly I went on reading it. Sturt's book bothered me because his motivation for writing it was, to my mind, so pure. The most elementary or direct reason to write a book, because you cared enough about the subject and had enough to say about the subject to write about every aspect of it, no matter how few readers would be interested. Sturt did not court an audience, though he implies possible readers and their attention. He asks himself in reference to the hanging the wheels on an axle, shall I tell how the arms were finally fixed in the axle bed, and how that was fixed to the body with clips and clip pins, to say nothing of tail pins? It isn't interesting enough, perhaps. More interesting is to note how the axle bed, ready at last, was lightly shaved up with the draw shave wherever possible. The whole book is like this. I went on reading it, even though he went into such detail about nothing much more than everything one could say about building a wagon or a dung cart. Perhaps I went on because of what I learned that was new to me, as for instance about a blacksmith not wishing to admit sunlight into his shop because it hindered him from seeing the intensity of his fire. Or that a carter might ask him for a slight modification to suit a special horse or a special bit of hilly road. In this exhaustiveness and fixation, Sturt's book resembled another book I had been steadily reading, though with long intermissions as I gathered the will to launch into it again. J.A. Baker's The Peregrine, which is really just as narrow in subject matter. There is one setting, the estuary. The figures animating the scene are rarely human beings, but mainly birds, the central figures being raptors. The weather plays a part in the landscape. Nothing much happens except what you would expect of the water, the clouds, the sun rising and setting, and the birds, which fly up or down or out over the water or land in a tree, remain sitting on a branch, clean themselves, sleep, tear apart their prey. Maybe my interest was sustained in both books by two qualities that are primary for me in a book. The author's character as it comes through, in other words, the company you keep for the quite long time it takes to read a book, especially a book with nothing at all you would ordinarily call plot or suspense or even argument. The other quality is the skill and beauty of the style of writing itself in both these books, particularly the sensitivity to sound and the high level of exactness. Sturt's exactness requires and draws on a wide specific vocabulary, but not much metaphor. Baker's, as he describes again and again a bird's flight or feathers or the changing weather, depends on not only descriptions of fine shades of difference, but one apt metaphor after another. Here is an example that plays gently on the sounds of the words while pairing a simile and a metaphor. Quote, 5 minutes later, he lifted into air again, circling, gliding, diving up to brightness, like a fish cleaving up through warm blue water, far from the falling nets of the starlings. Both books seemed to be guided only by the author's interest, without any concern that they might be crossing the line into tedious. Most of my stories are not tedious, but not all of them. A story may turn out to be tedious if it needs to be, or at least one of them did, Letter to the Foundation. This story is narrated by a character who is herself tedious.
very repetitious about some things that are worrying her to do with spending money. And although the problems are interesting in themselves, the long-winded story she tells goes on and on as she circles back more than once. Let her be tedious, I thought. That's the way she is. The other instance I can think of is not a story, but my quite long essay about learning Norwegian. To me, it is the opposite of tedious, but that is to me. I'm the one who wanted to write it. In this case, willing to be exhaustive like George Sturt and his wagons, I could not leave out the smallest detail about how I learned Norwegian, which was by opening to the first page and beginning to read a book in Norwegian. No dictionary, no grammar book, no teacher. Because the experience excited and fascinated me so, it was important to me to record it, just as the great skill refined over the centuries that was required to make a good and lasting wagon, suited to the roads it was to travel on, even to the width of the ruts of those country roads, mattered to Sturt, who knew it intimately, since the shop was his own, though he himself had only some of the skills of wagon making, as he makes clear, but was a skilled writer. Sometimes, like Sturt, I write to record a particular experience, or maybe even more accurate would be to say not just to record, but to replicate, to relive through the writing of it the experience I had. In the case of learning Norwegian, like jumping into a cold, clear, deep body of water, maybe the pool in a disused quarry, without knowing how to swim, and yet swimming. At the time when I thought I might write about how other writers wrote, I went beyond contemplating writers who were willing to risk being tedious and thought about the work of writers who were possibly difficult for some readers in other ways, and similarly willing to be peculiar, to be strange, to write about a certain subject or in a certain way, no matter what, which to me is a sign of an essential dedication or single-mindedness, such as Robert Musil's extended, unfinished The Man Without Qualities, or Walter Benjamin's Arcades Project, or the still strange to us poems of Emily Dickinson with her willful incongruities and native eccentricity, or the Gray Notebook, the diary of the Catalan Josep Pla, who took the slim record he had made as a young man of just a year or two of his life and spent the next 50 years annotating and elaborating on it to create the thick book he finally published. Or Elizabeth Smart's novel by Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept. In some parts, the book's strange and ever-changing prose is dense with impossible or elusive metaphors, such as, on her mangledness I am spreading my amorous sheets, or shame copulates with every September housefly. In another part, in exquisite juxtaposition, the questions posed by a border policeman questioning the morality of her behavior alternate with quotations from the Song of Solomon, heard only in her mind. What relation is this man to you? My beloved is mine, and I am his. He feedeth among the lilies. How long have you known him? I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He feedeth among the lilies. Did you sleep in the same room? Behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair, thou hast dove's eyes. In the same bed? Behold, thou art fair, my beloved, yea, pleasant. Also, our bed is green. The subject matter was outrageous at the time, especially to Elizabeth Smart's mother, who appears in the book and was so horrified by the book about her daughter's love affair with a married man, her daughter who at first shared this man with his wife, and then took this man for herself, who had children by him, that she managed to persuade her native Canada, she knew some powerful people, to ban the book's publication there, and then acquired all the copies she could and had them burned. Deep in the book, in a metaphor that rivals Baldwin's, Smart describes this difficult mother as having, quote, eyes like medieval wild men in her head. When I decided that I could try to answer the question of why I write by looking at why I write certain stories, I saw that, like the tedious woman in my story, The Foundation, I write also sometimes to figure out something I don't understand. That material outside me, or inside me, but coming to me as though found in a field, in this case as a sudden perception, does more than just bother me as something to which I want to give a form. It is something I don't fully understand and that I want to understand. A story may then evolve from that. Perhaps I think that putting a thought into a formal piece of writing may help me understand a puzzle. Here is an example of how a story evolved. It started with the death of a woman I did not know very well. Her death caused me to have some complex thoughts that were new to me about what is lost when someone dies. It was the very fact that I did not know her well that caused me to have these thoughts, since they were not complicated by any long or deep attachment to her. She was an elderly friend of the elderly mother of a friend of mine in my village. I had first met her at a one-time local gathering, long in the organizing, called the Jewish Farmers Reunion, which she attended because her family had had a chicken farm on the outskirts of our village. My friend and I attended because we were interested in all things having to do with local history. The second time I saw her was when the four of us had dinner together one night at the residence where she and my friend's mother lived, across the river in an upscale assisted living place with tablecloths and waitstaff and wine. I enjoyed the dinner and the company and looked forward to more dinners, to crossing the river again in my friend's car to see the two old women. I decided my new acquaintance would be my youthful old aunt, with her sense of humor, her kindness, her sharpness and poise, her fund of memories of the old days in the village. Then, within months of that night, she fell seriously ill with a condition that would require painful and protracted treatment. She chose instead to refuse treatment and just let herself go. She was gone within weeks. I felt the loss personally, but I also perceived what a loss of an enriched mind her death was. That mind of hers, which had developed over a lifetime to what it was, through childhood on the farm, her young womanhood, her marriage and her motherhood, her maturity, and the rich and lively friendships of old age, to become as complex and surprising as it now was. That mind was now shut down, eliminated, gone forever in a moment at her death. And immediately upon her death, the parts of her brain in particular that contained the memories of my village would soften and degenerate quite quickly. There was not only sadness, but also amazement for me in thinking about all this. The same wonder we return to habitually whenever we recognize that our apparently disembodied thoughts are not disembodied, but quite physically located somewhere within our brains. We even know the approximate locations, shooting around as electrical impulses. And then I associated these thoughts with what went on in my own brain, which still had blood flowing through it and electricity, including my constant attempts all my life to improve my German for no particular reason. The German in my brain was better now than it had been in my 20s or my 40s. The thought of those constant efforts, which seemed to me funny and a little pathetic, now came together with my thoughts about the end of my elderly friend, which had not been funny. There was a third element at the origin of this little story. It had a model, a poem I have read for decades now, a folk poem translated by the poet Anselm Hollow from the Cheremiss language. I had read it repeatedly because, in the same sense as Ashbery's experience with the painting by Parmigianino, this poem had bothered me for a long time. It puzzled me because it was a piece of writing that remained surprising to me, though I knew it well. But how did it do that? It is only 3 lines long. Untitled, translated from the Cheremis by Anselm Hollow. I shouldn't have started these red wool mittens. They're done now, but my life is over. What a small poem. But as with other short and simple pieces of writing, and long and complex ones too, of course, there is the surface sense of it and then more beneath the surface. In this case, the fact that whatever our projects may be, that life comes to an end, we come to an end, or that our projects consume our life and then we die, or that we spend our life on activities that may turn out to have used up our life pointlessly. This poem gave me a pattern for the beginning of my story, but then my story continued in a slightly different direction. Improving my German. All my life, I have been trying to improve my German. At last, my German is better. But now I am old and ill. I will die soon. But when they take me to my grave, I will have, somewhere in my brain, better German. So all that pondering and trying to accept or articulate something I had not fully comprehended before resulted in a very short story that nevertheless had a lot of thinking behind it, and then a lot of revision to arrive at it, and an upcropping within it of the humor that I perceived in my own relationship to German, but that did not exist in the original situation that so struck me and led me to thoughts, my only initial response to which seemed useless, saying to myself of the loss of my friend's mind, what a waste. Giving form to an aspect of my puzzlement and sadness, even though it did not mention my friend or her death, helped to relieve me of my feelings by transmuting them into the solidity of a piece of writing. It relieved me, too, of my amusement at my attempts to learn German. For amusement, too, likes to be relieved. So it must be that relieving myself of the burdens of strong feelings by taking them out of myself and putting them into an objective form, a form that can be also shared by others out in the world, is yet another reason why I write. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. That was wonderful. Thank you, prize recipients. Thank you, judges. Thank you, audience. Thank you, President McInnes. I hope you all join us all week for all these great events that we have lined up. Have a great night.